Okay, good morning, everybody. Happy Hanukkah once again. Today we're going to start a new chapter, as we mentioned yesterday. It's called Dine Ovrei Derachim, the laws of travelers, and Tsar Balei Chaim, and the prohibition of causing pain to animals. They go together, as we mentioned yesterday, because in general, the mode of transportation in the old world before the Industrial Revolution was animals. You used animals to travel. So it's important for us to put these together. Now today we make different use of animals. We have animals as pets. We have animals. We use animals for farming of our food. So we don't use animals for largely for transportation anymore, except in very rural locations. But still, we will see some important halachas nonetheless. Okay, so let's get started. Mi shepaga bechavero baderech. If you happen to encounter your friend on the road, uvehemto rovetzes tachas masa, and you happen to see that his animal is buckling under its load. And that was typically the illustration. That's what the Torah describes. You see your friend, he's got his donkey loaded up, and the donkey is struggling with walking straight and being able to support the load. Bein shahaya aleha masa hara bein shahaya aleha yoser mimasa. It's irrelevant, according to the Gemara, whether the animal was overloaded or not. Either way, hareza mitzvah l'sayo, it is nonetheless a mitzvah to help your friend, lifrok me aleha, to help unload the animal so that the animal can regain its footing and be loaded up properly afterwards. V'zu mitzvahs aseh. This is a positive commandment. Shenemar kisireh chamor sona'acha rovetz tachas masa'o v'gomer azov ta'azov ima. So we're going to see there's two sets of psukim, one in the book of Shemos and one in the book of Devarim. It says in Shemos, in Parshas Mishpatim, when you will see the donkey of your enemy buckling under its load, you shall surely turn aside for his sake. In other words, you shall surely come to his aid. The Gemara says that the reason why the illustration is the donkey of your enemy is to tell you that this is not because you feel any particular affection for this person, but rather because you have a mitzvah to help a fellow Jew and to help an animal that's in crisis. It's got nothing to do with your friendship of the guy. You can continue hating him, right? V'lo yifruok v'yanichenu nivhal v'yelech lo. And furthermore, you should not just help unload the donkey and then just leave him there, all in a state of anxiety, because now he's got a completely unloaded donkey on the side of the road. Ela yakim imo v'yachzer v'yiton aleha masa'a karoila. But rather, what you're obligated to do is take the additional time once you've unloaded the animal to help him reload the animal properly, so that the animal is not overloaded and that there's an equal distribution of weight on the animal's back, so that it's able to support the weight of the load. Shenemar, as it says, Lo sir'eh es chamor achicha o sharo naflim baderech v'his alam tamehem hakem takim imo. And this is from Devarim. It's because the Torah says, do not see the donkey of your brother or his ox falling down on the road, and you hide from them. Hakem takim imo, you shall surely establish with him. Now, establish with him means that not only do you have a mitzvah to unload the donkey, but you also have a mitzvah to reload the donkey. Zu mitzvahs aseh acheres, and therefore this is a separate positive commandment. V'im hinicho nivhal, and if you completely forsake your friend, you see that he's struggling with his situation, with his animal, and you decide just to ignore him, velo parak velo ta'an, and you neither unload nor reload, bitel mitzvahs aseh, va'avar alos aseh. You have forsaken a positive commandment, and you have violated a negative commandment, shenemar lo sira, because the Torah said, do not see your friend's donkey falling down on the road. So what we see from here is that there's both a positive and negative commandment involved, that there's this mitzvah begins when you see an animal buckling under its load, and you have a mitzvah to help unload the animal, and then you have a mitzvah to reload the animal afterwards. Now, the question is, let's say you see your friend hasn't loaded up his donkey at all yet. Am I obligated to assist him? Right? So what we're going to see now is that the primary mitzvah, or the more important consideration, is to help unload an animal that is buckling under its load. The secondary mitzvah is to help your friend reload the animal. And the reason why one is considered more primary and the other one is considered secondary is for a simple reason, that you have this issue of tsar balei chaim. You have the issue of your friend's animal is enduring pain, and you have a mitzvah to help alleviate the pain of the animal, and that's why there's an additional imperative to help unload the animal. As far as loading up the animal, well, it depends. What if the job that he's going to require to help you load up his animal, it may take hours, or it may take a significant amount of time that you don't have. So as we're going to see, this mitzvah of what we call te'ina, of loading up an animal, is only applicable when he's willing to compensate you for your time. But if he's not willing to compensate you for your time, then we'll see as we go along in this halacha that you're not going to be obligated. So before we go any further, and it's going to take us a few days to get a more comprehensive view of this mitzvah, let's take a look at the Imrei Yaakov, at least on Sif Aleph, and look and see what he says. Okay, shepaga b'chavero, that if you happen to encounter your friend on the road, so he says, Davka Yisrael, this mitzvah only applies when you encounter a fellow Jew. Aval paga b'nochri, eno b'mitzvahs prika te'ina, ela mishum tsar balei chaim kimavor lekamon. Now, but if you encounter a Gentile, there is no specific mitzvah of unloading or loading up the animal, but there still remains the consideration of tsar balei chaim. Tsar balei chaim is in the prohibition of allowing an animal to endure pain. And when we talk about pain, we mean gratuitous pain. We're going to get into that later on. And so you may still have an obligation, not for the sake of the Gentile, to help him, to assist him in his struggle of of traveling with a load, but you still have a mitzvah to help save the animal from pain, and we're going to see that later on. V'geder pigia mavur lekamen sivvav ayin sham. And as far as what it means to encounter someone, how far away do you have to, or how close do you have to be, that too is something that we will examine later on. Okay? All right. Okay, next. Uvehem torovetzes. If a person's animal is buckling under its load. V'chol behema bichlal. Every animal is included in this mitzvah. It is not just the donkey. The fact that the Torah addresses the case of a donkey, it's not to be taken literally limited to donkeys, ela kol behema, but rather all animals. Ela shedibor hakasuv b'hoive shahachamorim lemasa. The pasuk is speaking in the most common example, which is that typically people use donkeys as beasts of burden. Now, he then says an interesting discussion over here. V'nechleku haposkim ishayach mitzvahs priko te'ina ba'adam atzma hanosei masa. The poskim disagree as to whether the mitzvah of prika te'ina applies to a person who's carrying a load on his own back. or carrying a bag of stuff, and he's got 3 bags in this hand, 3 bags in that hand, and one of the plastic bags is breaking. Do I have a mitzvah in that situation of prika and te'ina, because I see him struggling with what he's got? He says, the das harashba, the he mitzvah de oraisa mikal v'chomer. So the Rashba, who's one of the Rishonim, is of the opinion that if there's a mitzvah to help a struggling animal, then surely there's a mitzvah to help a struggling human. He says, Di'i mishum tzara de balechaim tzivta Torah, kol shekain b'tzara de Yisrael. If the Torah is concerned about an animal's pain, then surely the Torah would be concerned about a human being's pain. So therefore, it would seem clear, according to the Rashba, that if you see any human being, whether it's a Jew or a non-Jew, struggling under his load, you have an obligation to help that person. So that's one opinion. Let me just see. Okay. And by the way, in the Shar Hatzion, he says this is also the opinion of the Sefer HaChinuch, and it is also the opinion of the Rambam. Uvishailas uchuvas haradbaz polygolov. But the Radbaz, which is a later medievalist, he actually disagrees with the Rashba. And he says, Ho'ol v'ha'adam hu ba'al seichel, v'lo hayalo liton atzmo yetzer min haroilo. He says the Torah, when it talks about the mitzvah of helping unload an animal, is only because an animal does not have intellect and does not have the ability to choose how much of a burden is placed on its back. But a human being has seichel, and a human being has the ability to discern how much is too much for the human being to carry. Lachein lo shayach etzlo chiyuv prika. And therefore there's no obligation for me to help unload or help a struggling human who's carrying too much on his back. Let him take care of himself. In other words, the Torah's commandment is only when the animal doesn't have the wherewithal to alleviate its own problem. But a human being can always just, if he's carrying too much and he's struggling, well, just sit down for a second, man. Take the packages off your own back and let them and take a moment and readjust everything. Umikol makom. Gam hu moda shu bichlal gemilos chasadim ubichlal v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. So the Radbaz seems pretty heartless, right? I mean, here you are, you see this human being struggling, and the Radbaz's opinion is there's no mitzvah of helping him unload. So the Radbaz is not saying just keep walking. The Radbaz is saying it's not under the rubric of this mitzvah in the Torah of unloading a donkey, but it is under a different rubric. It's under the rubric of doing an act of gemilus chesed, of an act of kindness and loving your neighbor as yourself, right? That you certainly are still commanded to. Rak eno bichlal asay da azov ta'azov imo vehakem takim imo, but it's just not under the rubric of this particular mitzvah. Avol avon gadolhu im hinichu bahul b'maso v'holachla. But the Radbaz acknowledges that it's a terrible thing. It's a criminal thing. If you see a person struggling on the road, and you just ignore him and keep going, that would be a terrible thing. Now, certainly, this would fall, in modern applications. Anytime you see a fellow, a Jew for sure, who's, let's say, his car broke down on the side of the road, you have a mitzvah. If you feel that he might need your help or he could use your help, you have a mitzvah because of Gemilus Chesed and Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha to stop and to help him. Right? There's a story. I don't know if you've heard this story about a guy who was driving in New York, and he sees a guy with a yarmulke who's got a flat tire on the side of the road, so he pulls over to see if he can help him. And the guy gets close to him and sees that he's Puerto Rican. He says, "Why are you wearing a kippah?" He says, "Well, because I know that any time a guy wears one of these things, and he needs help on the side of the road, someone always stops for him. So I figured I'd wear one of these yarmulkes so that I would get someone to stop and help me. So it's all like in large Jewish populations. It's already known that Jews, we take care of each other, and so you have so there's it's considered an act of chesed. Is it under the rubric of this particular mitzvah? So that's where there's a machlokas. Now uveshita mikubetzes. Now we have another one of the Rishonim who gives another opinion. Kosav de mitzvahs priko teina lo shayach ba'adam mehatorah ela midirabanan ayin sham. So he gives sort of like a middle opinion between the two that we just saw, which is that biblically there's no mitzvah of prika and te'ina for a human who's buckling, but there's a rabbinic obligation nonetheless under this rubric. Okay, and then v'hasma v'hataz kas v'degam ba'adam iketzar b'alei chayim min haTorah. And both the Sma and the Taz, commentaries to the Shulchan Aruch, both acknowledge that there is also a mitzvah of preventing tsar balei chayim, of pain to all living creatures. That mitzvah extends to human beings as well. So if you see a human being in pain, and that makes no difference whether they're Jew or non-Jew, you see another human being in pain, you have an obligation to try and help them, right? So people who are callous to what's going on in geopolitical news, in the world out there, where you hear about, people in Bosnia, or or what was that genocide in Africa? I forget, but a Jew has to be concerned about tsar balei chayim, about pain if you were concerned about pain to an animal, then even more so we're concerned about pain to human beings. And so even if I can't necessarily do something about it, but at least I have to be pained about it, that another living creature is in pain. And if there's something that I can do about it, which is trying to have some kind of political influence or send a donation to help, then I certainly have an obligation to do so, to try and alleviate human pain. Okay, and so Jewish people who care only about doing chesed and kindness to just our fellow Jews, even when they know that other people are suffering in the world, right? It certainly is creating. There certainly should be some level of cognitive dissonance if your sensitivity to pain only extends to Jews but does not extend to any other creature in the world. Okay.
Rabbi, we sort of have to look at things like we take care of ourselves, because nobody's really going to care about the Jewish people. So I thought our focus always has to be on ourselves to a great extent, and maybe a little bit to the outside world, because nobody's really caring about the Jewish people.
Yeah, I would say that probably more than half of our resources should be devoted to our own Jewish causes, but that should not be at the complete ignorance, at the expense of completely ignoring what's going on in the rest of the world. We shouldn't completely ignore what's going on in the rest of the world, as you know, just like we shouldn't ignore what's going on to animals, how animals are being treated today. We shouldn't ignore how other human beings are being treated today.
So does that mean that a certain percentage of our stuck dollars, for example, should be allotted outside the Jewish community?
Yeah, absolutely. A certain percentage should be allotted outside the Jewish community. That's even codified in the Shulchan Aruch and the laws of tzedakah, that the Shulchan Aruch says you have to give to non-Jewish charities at least to preserve the peace. At least to preserve peace and healthy relations between Jews and non-Jews. It doesn't say how much of a percentage, but it has to be some percentage. Okay. So the next piece in the Imrei Yaakov is that you should you should come to that animal's aid and your friend's aid, regardless of whether he loaded it appropriately or whether he overloaded it. And so the point is, v'lo amrinan kevan shehiniach aleha yeser mimasa'a harei mischayev ba'atzmo. We do not say that since he overloaded it, perhaps it was due to his own negligence, then we can say it's your own fault for having done something foolish, and for having overloaded the animal. The afal pi da ha'emes kenhu, and because even though the truth of the matter is that he did overload the animal, and he did something that was unwise, mikol malkom chiyavaso haTorah ulai bishgaga asakein. But the Torah nevertheless obligates me to come to his aid. In other words, we don't take the attitude in the Torah that because you did something foolish to yourself, I can just ignore you. Just because a person did this to themselves and overloaded their animal does not exempt me from coming to their aid, even though they created the problem themselves. But nonetheless, because, maybe you just were a poor judge of this animal's abilities, or maybe you just, it's your first time loading an animal, you had no idea what you were doing, right? And secondarily, even if the guy is an idiot and he overloaded the animal, but I still have to come to his aid because of the concerns for the animal's pain. So both of those reasons, so there are two arguments. When you see a guy having created his own problem, where he's overloaded his animal, right? So number one, so there are two reasons why you can't say, well, the guy's an idiot, why should I help him? He just created his own problem. Reason number one is because maybe he really genuinely doesn't know what he's doing. Okay, and so don't take his lack of knowledge or understanding of animals. Don't hold that against him. It's his first time. But the second reason is that even if he is being an idiot and he should have known better, I still have an obligation to help because the animal's in pain, and I have to come to the animal's aid. Okay. All right. So it's a mitzvah l'sayao. It's a mitzvah for me to help him. U'mitzvahs prika eno ela keshechavero eno yachol lifrok levado v'tzarach siyua. He says the mitzvah of unloading an animal is only extant when my friend does not have the ability to do it by himself in an expeditious way, and he could use my help. Aval hecha sheyachol lifrok levado as ein bo mishum mitzvahs prika. But if he can do it on his own, and he can do it quite efficiently on his own, so I no longer have an obligation to help him. U'mikol makom yesh omrim dechayev l'sayei lo min haTorah mishum tzar Yisrael dahavi bichlal tzar baalei chayim. He says, but there is an opinion, and he quotes, who's he quoting here? He's quoting the Taz. He says that, let's say I see a guy who's quite capable of unloading the animal. I still have an obligation, according to the Taz, to go over to him and offer my assistance to him because he's another human being in pain. And there's an obligation to help another human being who's experiencing pain. Now, he may be going through emotional pain or emotional distress, but I still have an obligation to help him. He says, V'tzarech iyun, and it sort of really requires a little bit more analysis because there's a lot of stuff that's unclear. This is a very gray area. And in the footnote, he says where it's the other comment he brings from other commentaries. He brings from other commentaries that when you see another Jew in pain, you have an obligation to help him, but others don't find this to be a particular mitzvah. In the parentheses over here, he said you're allowed to that you're entitled to compensation in that kind of situation because there's no one under actual physical distress. And so this is a very gray area, whether I can argue that if I see a person in emotional distress, but not in physical distress, because he can handle it himself, do I have an obligation to help him? But certainly it would seem that from a chesed standpoint, if you see someone in distress, you should go over and see what you can do to help them. Okay? And then he writes, V'zu mitzvah saseh, it is a positive commandment. Ein mevorchim al mitzvah zu mipnei she'enu biad ha'osek, shema lo yirtzeh chavero biprikaso uti'inasa. The question is, do you make a bracha on this mitzvah? As you go over to your friend, should you say, Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech ha'olam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu lifrok et ha'behema, that you commanded us to unload the animal. So he says no, that you don't make a bracha on this mitzvah, because it's something that you cannot ensure will be successfully done. Maybe you go over to your friend and you start helping him and he says, no, you're doing it all wrong. Get away from me, you're making things worse, right? So because you cannot guarantee that you'll be successful in the mitzvah, you're not allowed to make the bracha. He says, when it comes to things that are completely within your purview and ability to accomplish, that's when you make a mitzvah in advance, with the confidence that you'll be able to fulfill the mitzvah. I'm standing in front of the menorah, I'm about to light the candles, I can make a bracha. Is there a small possibility that the candle will not ignite because the oil is bad or whatever? Yeah, it's a small possibility, but as long as I've done everything that is within my power, then I can confidently make a bracha with the assurance that the mitzvah will be that I can perform this mitzvah correctly. But when a mitzvah is dependent upon another person's attitude, especially when that person is quite anxious in this situation, I shouldn't make a bracha because maybe he'll reject my assistance or tell me to stop in the middle, or who knows what else will happen. So therefore, you don't make a bracha on this mitzvah. Okay, but if you do leave a person and ignore him, and you leave him riddled with anxiety and do not help him, you have violated both a positive and a negative commandment. And that's in a situation where you can both unload and reload the animal. So, as he foreshadows the halachas we're going to see later on, he says, "V'dafka kishahalo rotzeh litain lo sachar, azu mechuyav l'sayao." He says it's only if the person is willing to pay you to help reload the animal do you have an obligation to assist him. Aval imlo patur kidolikaman seif gimel. But if he's not interested in compensating you for your time, then once you've alleviated the pain to the animal, then you're under no further obligation. Yes, this is a mitzvah, but you're entitled to compensation for your time. And if he says I don't have any money, or I'm not prepared to pay you for your efforts, then you can say to him, I would love to help you. I'll spend a few minutes helping you, but this is a major job, and I simply don't have the time. And you can basically say goodbye if you really need to go to do the rest of your work. Okay. All right. Questions, comments?
Well, Rabbi, if the mitzvah is to show compassion, so isn't the effort alone sufficient to say that you've fulfilled the mitzvah?
You mean as far as whether you can make the bracha or not? Is that what you're referring to, Brian?
Yes. You're showing compassion.
Yeah, but you haven't fulfilled technical mitzvah of unloading and loading by just showing compassion. The mitzvah, there is a separate mitzvah of showing compassion. But here where the Torah says you shall load and unload, the mitzvah is actually unloading and loading. The mitzvah is not compassion. Right? I mean, you've definitely fulfilled your obligation. If let's say you go over to a guy and offer him, please let me help you. So you've certainly shown compassion. Have you fulfilled the mitzvah by expressing your sympathies? No. Right. Okay. All right. So have a happy Hanukkah again, everyone. I hope you're able to make it to a minyan. If not, happy davening at home. and we'll see you, Mirza Hashem, tomorrow. Take care.